Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. So I think I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also, law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Pretty succinct. You want to support? Go to Patreon. Should be a link in the show notes. Boom. Saddle up for today's episode. The 257 Roberts. A quarter bore worth knowing. It's a pretty cool cartridge based on what I would consider one of the great cartridges. World renowned for its versatility and abilities in both warfighting, military prowess, and game harvesting ability, up to and including elephants. No, I'm not talking about the 30-06. Let's not be so American-centric here. How about a cartridge that predates it? The 7x57. I've done a whole cartridge talk on it. It is a great cartridge. What happens when you neck that old girl down to 25 caliber? Well, you get the 257 Roberts. If you've listened to a number of cartridge talks, you're probably familiar with the term necking up or necking down. You're taking the original cartridge, necking it down, making the neck smaller, narrower, and putting a smaller bullet than was in the original case. 7x57, 7mm, or 280. You punch that down, neck it down to 25 caliber. A lighter bullet going faster. If you're not familiar with the weight range of 25 calibers, quarter bores are not as popular today, I think, as they maybe should be or were in days of yore, but they're still quite capable. If you're not familiar with that class, that quarter bore 25 caliber, they'll run the gambit, and you can, I'm sure, get lighter or heavier. But in general, let's say 80-something grains to about 117 grains. And when I mention 100 and something grainish to 85 to 100 and some grain, I think the game animal that immediately pops into my head, and maybe many people that are familiar with ballistics, is deer. And I think that's where this cartridge shines. It's a fine whitetail, mule deer, or anything in that category. That size, even-toed ungulate, that size animal. 100 to 250 pounds, that size animal, that's really where that shines. One of my favorite all-time deer cartridges is 243. One of my favorite all-time loads in that is 85 grain Sierra Game King over some Varget. Now that may have just been Greek to you mostly, but that said, that's a great deer caliber, the 243. Now, usually the top end for 243s is 100 grain. That's kind of getting towards your top end. Well, you notice I mentioned 117 grain in the 257 Roberts. So you're starting at kind of that 80-something grain and moving it up to 117 grains. Since we've talked about grain weight, I guess it's time to get nerdy. I looked some of this stuff up and read about it on Wikipedia to give credit where credit is due and some other places. I'm going to turn to the old Hornady reloading manual to get you guys some numbers to give credit where credit is due here. And I gained some initial knowledge opening up the book here. It lists a light bullet at 60 grains. So if you look at that, 60 grains at 3,800 feet a second. That's a legit varmint round. That will be a fine, fantastic varmint round. 60 grains, that's not much more than a 55 grain that you would think of in a 223. And you're talking 3,800 feet a second. That's impressive. Be a great coyote round, I got to imagine. Moving up to 87 grains, you're talking 3,300 feet a second. That's respectable. And moving up to the 117 grain at 2,900 feet a second. And the 110 grain, 117 grain, 100 grain, that's pretty legit for deer hunting. Again, I think that's this cartridge's sweet spot. If you wanted a good crossover round between varmint and deer, I think it would be a good choice. That being said, we probably should compare it to the 243. 243, I got a listing in here for 100 grains at 3,100. The 257 Roberts, 100 grain at 3,000, and there is one load at 3,100. So we'll call that close enough, right? But again, you can bump it up to 117 grains in this cartridge. And that begs the question, well, why don't we compare it to probably the most popular quarter bore of all time here in America? I can't speak to other countries. The 25-06. You take the 30-06 and neck it down to 25 caliber. So let's compare the 117 grains. You got a 117 in the 257 Roberts going at 2,900 and a 117 grain in the 25-06 going at 3,100. So it's less powerful than the 25-06. And I think that's okay. I think a lot of times we get in this mentality, more is better, more is better. Well, if 30-06 is good, 300 Win Mag must be better. And I don't know that that's always the case. 117 grain bullet at 2,900 feet a second is great. That would be just fine for deer, whitetail, mule deer, antelope. Why might you pick this over the 25-06? Well, I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't. I would probably go 25-06. But character and uniqueness, something that can't really be quantified on game. But it's a cool old caliber. Wildcatted in the 20s, commercially produced in the 30s. Maybe, and since this was based on the 7x57, I got to imagine there's quite a few sporting rifles out there based on those old Mauser actions in 257 Roberts. If you just wanted a classic Mauser that was already sporterized, you didn't want to take a military one and chop it up, but one that's already been sporterized in 257 Roberts, it still would be a great way to go out and hunt deer with this classic, maybe bring back war trophy that somebody brought back and then wanted to actually hunt with it because that was the rifle they had and converted it to 257 Roberts. Also, if you wanted a short action. Now, there's some discussion, I saw quite a bit of debate about this, but I do believe with a lot of loads you can get the 257 Roberts to work just fine in a short action. That being said, I haven't done it personally, but it seems to be okay in a short action. If you want to take full advantage of long bullets seated out far, you may want to do it in a long action, but that might be one reason you choose it over some other things like the 25-06. Or perhaps where that did not apply, again, those old Mauser conversions, or you just want a cool classic cartridge in a really classic looking gun. One that comes to mind, I do believe they made the Ruger number 1, beautiful single shot rifle in 257 Roberts. I also, when I say they made the Ruger RSI, that long international, what a cool combo that would be to hunt deer. A Ruger International and 257 Roberts. Or let's say you're just kicking around gun stores, gun shows, and you don't want the next latest and greatest push feed, plastic fantastic, plastic stocked rifle. Even if it is more accurate, even if it is lighter. You want to hunt with a classic gun. You want to take a vintage gun and give it some new life and still hunt with it. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you find one, if you come across a good rifle, a well-done sporterized rifle, or even a purpose-built, like a Winchester, Remington, something like that, older rifle, built to be a sporting rifle in 257 Roberts, it's still great for what it was great for. To the best of my knowledge, white-tailed deer have not yet taken steroids. They're taxonomically the same as they were, 100 years ago. These old classic cartridges will work just fine. So if that appeals to you, maybe this cartridge would appeal to you. And I'd like to wrap it up. There's nothing wrong with a 25-06. In fact, if I was getting a quarter bore, I would probably get a 25-06. But 257 Roberts is good too. If you are interested in this cartridge, you may look at that one. You may also look at its parent, the one we started with, the 7x57 Mauser. Fantastic all-around game cartridge. You want to hunt something maybe bigger or let's say a more well-rounded cartridge, you might look at the 7x57. You also may look at the 250 Savage. All great cartridges, all classic. And even if you never want one or get one, at least you'll better understand the 257 Roberts. Hopefully you enjoyed this cartridge talk and this Better Know a Cartridge. Short episodes, I'm not going to give a tactical. Endurance is a great attribute, whether it's for a soldier on the battlefield or a hunter. Verse. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved.